Welcome. I'm Ryan Holger with Temperature Equipment Corporation. You may or may not have heard of our company before, depending on who forwarded you the invite to this webinar. We're an HVAC distributor locally. We normally work with mechanical engineers and contractors and those kind of folks. But recently, this past week specifically, we've been doing a series of webinars on different types of buildings. This is part 4 of 5 different modules. If you have not watched part 1 yet, I would encourage you to do so. So if you're with me today, stick on. We'll go through everything, but then go back and watch part 1 because it has a lot more detail on a lot of these things. If you're watching the recorded version of this, then stop what you're doing, go back and watch part 1 from Wednesday, the 18th, and then come back and watch this one. Yesterday, we did similar topics for the restaurant market and for indoor sporting venues like basketball courts, gymnasiums, fitness centers, wrestling rooms, MMA workout facilities, etc. Today's topic is going to be on schools. Give me 1 second. There's some noise out my office. I'm going to shut that down. All right. I don't know if you could hear those guys out in the warehouse talking or not, but hopefully you don't hear them anymore. Okay, so we're going to dive right into this thing here, if my mouse works. All right, so as mentioned, part 4, part 5, one more part this afternoon if you're available. We're going to talk about some similar things that we talked to in the first 4 parts, but we'll talk about for use at your own home, some small scale stuff that might help you out. Our agenda for right now, these are the 4 major things that we want to tackle. And specifically, we're doing all of this in relation to IAQ, indoor air quality, and with a very specific focus on COVID-19, because that's obviously what's on everybody's minds. I don't want to be in some kind of debate either on whether schools should be open or not open. I have my own opinions on that, but that doesn't make any difference for this topic. Whether your school is open right now, or whether you're going to open next month, or in January, or in September, at some point you're probably going to open the building again. If not, we have bigger problems. And when you do, I'd like you to be able to do it with as much HVAC related safety in mind. I also don't want to debate on other stuff like whether you should have masks and shields and all that. All that stuff has been beaten to death by everybody else. I'm just putting my blinders on and we're going HVAC, heating, ventilating, and air conditioning only. So as such, these are our 4 topics for this morning. Outdoor air requirements related to schools, filtration options that you can upgrade in your existing cooling systems. We'll talk about different types. Schools are a little harder than some other types of buildings because there's lots of different types of systems you might run into. So we'll tell you what you can do and not do in certain ones. We'll talk about air purification, same kind of discussion as we have with filtration on what applies where. And then we'll touch a little bit on some of the things that you can do if you happen to have a building automation system. There might be some upgrades that can help us with all of this. So first off, ventilation air. As you might expect, outside air is significantly cleaner than indoor air. So we want to bring outside air into the building to dilute down all the pollutants in the building. There's some cost with this, obviously, because you have to heat and cool the outside air. This shouldn't be any surprise to you. Your building should already be doing this. Every single building in the entire state and the Midwest and the country should be bringing in fresh air for their occupants by code. The code that we follow specifically is, well, the standard we follow is ASHRAE 62.1. ASHRAE is the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers. Got it out in one breath. That group has a standard called 62.1. They have a whole bunch of standards, but that's the one we care about right now for indoor air quality, and they do specify how much ventilation is required for different types of spaces. The International Mechanical Code takes that table from ASHRAE and cuts and pastes it right into their code book. And then most of the municipalities, cities, counties, so forth, states in some cases, adopt that code. This is pretty much the table you will find for almost everywhere in the whole country, with the exception of the state of Wisconsin and the city of Chicago. Everywhere else is going to pretty much follow this table. But even if you're in Chicago or Wisconsin, you'll have something similar to this. It'll just be a little bit different. This is like 4 or 5 pages worth of tables. I just kind of screenshot the education-related ones out of here. Most of the numbers on here you can completely ignore. There are only 2 columns that apply. The first off is the CFM per person, and then the CFM per square foot. CFM is cubic feet per minute. So I got a box of air. That's a cubic foot, 1 by 1 by 1. How many of those boxes of outside air can I suck into the building every minute? The other ones, liters per second, ignore those because we don't care about metric right now. We're sticking on US units. So CFM per person and CFM per square foot. Now, the reason we have two numbers, per person and per square foot, is we have two major sources of pollutants in every building. People are a major source of pollutant. In fact, probably arguably the largest source of pollutant. The more people you have in the space, the more things they bring in with them, more bioaffluents they bring in. They have germs, they're coughing on stuff, hairs falling off their head, whatever they got going on, the more of them there are, the more problems there are. And then other stuff too. They might be wearing weird colognes and who knows what else in addition to germs. And as they walk around and move around the building, they stir up other stuff on the carpeting and the flooring material and the counters and all of that. So we need to bring a certain amount of fresh air in to dilute down all of the people that are there. Fresh air comes in, somewhere else the stale, dirty air is leaving. And the more fresh air we bring in, the more stale air gets shoved out. We also have a per square footage number because the building itself has its own pollutants, right? Whatever paints you used probably had VOCs in them and they're off-gassing. The cleaners that you're using on the tables and desks, which you're probably using even more of it now this year, that stuff may not be great to breathe. The furnishings you use, the chair materials, the woods, all that stuff has chemicals on it, and we need to dilute that down by code and just because it's smart. So when we look at some of the typical spaces, this is K through 12 in this audience. So you're looking at classrooms, ages 5. Well, actually, both classrooms are the same nowadays. So you need 10 CFM per person plus 0.12 CFM per square foot, and you add those two numbers together. If you have something like art rooms and science labs and stuff like that, the per person number stays the same, but the per square footage number goes up because you're going to have other stuff going on. You're going to have paints and acetone and whatever's going on in the art classroom and the science lab. God knows what you're going to have in there. If you have wood and metal shops, same thing, 10 per person, but a higher, beefier rate for the equipment that you're using, right? Maybe you got a grinder or maybe it's welding or something like that. So you have more exhaust requirements, hence more fresh air requirements in this space. By the way, all of these numbers are pretty large. They're larger than most other spaces. So for example, like a typical office building is 5 CFM per person instead of 10 and 0.06 CFM per square foot instead of 0.12. It's literally half the ventilation rate of a classroom. So the codes are pretty strict on schools, making you guys bring in a lot more fresh air than other types of spaces might require. So how do we get that fresh air in there? You guys are going to have all sorts of different types of equipment, and we'll touch on those. But just generically speaking right now, let's assume you have packaged rooftops on top of your building, right? Here's a packaged rooftop unit. It's a box that does your furnace, your air conditioner, all the blower fans, the condenser fans, everything's in one box. And there is usually, usually an outside air intake hood on here. If there's not, you need to get one. So this guy allows fresh air to suck up underneath here and mix in with the return air from the space and then be heated, cooled, filtered, etc., and delivered back to the space, right? So fresh ventilation air comes in, return air comes from the space, those two guys mix, they get filtered, cooled, heated, run through a fan, and sent back into the building. You may have other types of equipment. You may have air handlers or unit ventilators. They're doing the same thing. They just look physically different, but they're doing the same thing. So in your existing buildings, we need to get your ventilation rates at least back up to these code rates. Not doing the code required ventilation in general is a problem. And obviously it's even worse when we have a disease situation like we have with COVID-19 right now. You may have seen some recommendations, especially back in May from CDC, and they were getting their recommendations from ASHRAE about bringing in even more ventilation, like over-ventilating, doing more than the code required amount of air. And obviously from a COVID standpoint, that would be beneficial. If I could bring 100% outside air in and have no return air from the space, it'd be a lot cleaner for everybody. But that does cause a lot of problems with your ability to heat and cool the air, and specifically, and especially in the summertime, your ability to dehumidify the air. This is showing an example from a specific building that took that recommendation. They had reasonable indoor humidities, actually really good indoor humidities for that matter, 35, 40%, that kind of range. And then when they went ahead and did the over-ventilation recommendation, you saw that their indoor humidity jumped up. It pretty much doubled. Now it's 55, 60, some cases as high as 74% relative humidity. By the way, if you watched any of the other webinars this week, you need to keep the relative humidity below 60% to avoid lots of bad things. What are lots of bad things? pretty much everything. So you probably have seen this chart before, either with me or from manuals and stuff like that. When things get really dry in a space, certain types of bacteria and viruses and so forth thrive, as well as static door shocks and bloody noses and all that. And when it gets really humid, other things, other bacteria and viruses and fungus and molds thrive. So we want to keep stuff between, well, we used to say between 30 and 60. Now most of the recommendations are between 40 and 60. And if you looked at some of the COVID specific related data that I showed you guys on the intro day on Wednesday, I'd really like to be like 45 to 55, like really tight. That's going to be difficult to do. In some cases, most cases, you'd have to add a humidifier to get it back up above 30 or 40%. On the top end, keeping it below 60, there's lots of things we can do in relation to that. But one of those things is not bringing in a lot of fresh air. I want to bring in the code required amount from those tables, right? And my equipment should be sized to handle the code required amount because somebody designed it that way originally. But if you want to bring in more outside air, then we're going to have to take a look at it and see if your equipment can handle that properly. Otherwise, you're going to have really cold spaces in the winter and really humid spaces in the spring, summer, fall. So if you want to do over ventilation, let us know. We'll help you look at it to see if you can handle that. The other thing we want to do is we want to try to filter stuff out of the air, including COVID, obviously. We had a whole discussion on different types of filters on Wednesday that you're welcome to go back and watch if you didn't see. I know I keep referencing previous topics from this week. There's just so much stuff, which is why we had to bust it up into 5 topics. So there's a little bit of overlap, but if you watch intro and then the kind of building you care, you'll be good. This is showing you some different particle sizes, starting over here with a pretty large piece of sand. Actually, it's a really small piece of sand blown up. So this is sand. This is one of your hairs, which is skinnier than most sand. And then this blue dot here is PM10, and the red one is PM2.5. PM stands for particulate matter, and the 10 means 10 microns. Micron is a micrometer, so really small, smaller than a millimeter. So 10 micron size and 2.5 micron size. We reference those because those are the ones that are usually tested. Most handheld particulate countermeters that you would utilize will be measuring those 2 different levels, just so it gives you kind of a perspective. If I put COVID-19 on here, it's a little tiny dot. You wouldn't even know that the dot was there. It is around 0.12 micrometers. So it's really, 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 really tiny. So that makes it very difficult to catch. With that being said, as far as viruses go, it's actually a pretty big virus. This is the scale that I've been using for, I don't even know, 2 decades while doing my IAQ training for contractors. And microns is right here across the top, from smallest to biggest. And this stuff over here is the big stuff, the easy stuff for us to catch with a filter. Hair, sand, pollen, etc. Here's bacteria, which is really tiny, and then viruses are even smaller than that. The COVID-19 virus is all the way to the far right-hand side of this scale. It is a very large virus, but it's still smaller than bacteria and mold and hair and all that stuff. So it is still pretty small and difficult to catch. We discussed the Merv filtration rating system on Wednesday as well. And this is that scale. It goes from 1 through 20, with 20 being the best filter, 1 being the worst filter. My shirt is probably better than a Merv 1, so Merv 1 is nothing. And then it tells you the size of particles that you can catch 99% of the size that they would have. If you remember, ASHRAE's recommendation was to use Merv 13 or 14 filters to have a chance at catching better than 50% of these COVID-sized viruses, particles. And then as you go further up the scale, you'll be able to catch more and more and more and more of them. But unless you're doing Merv 13 or 14, it's doing nothing. So if your building has Merv 6 or Merv 8 filters, which is pretty standard filtration for a lot of air handling pieces of equipment, it's catching dust and keeping dust off the coil, and that's his job in life. And it's not doing anything for your air quality. It's not even catching really bacteria, let alone viruses. If you start beefing it up to Merv 10 or Merv 12, now you're getting some of that bacteria caught, but you're not doing anything for viruses. You need to get down here to 13 or 14 to have a chance at catching COVID. And then higher than that, Merv 15 and greater, if you want to start catching other smaller viruses like influenza, for example. HEPA filters, which I'm sure you've heard of that term, those are Merv 17 through 19. So those are really good. They're going to be catching 99% of stuff 0.3 micrometers and smaller. The testing begins at 0.3 and goes up from there. Actually, it begins at 2.5. The testing from HEPA begins at 0.3. The testing for in the field air quality begins at 2.5. but we need to catch stuff even smaller. So depending on the kind of equipment that you have at your building, there are different filtration options. You may have an air handler. It would look something similar to this, or it might even look different than this, but it's going to be the system that has your fan in it, as well as your heating and cooling coils, and it is typically going to be located indoors inside the building. So somewhere you got a mechanical room, you have 3 or 4 of these air handlers, they duct out to different parts of your school. So if I have this kind of equipment, I actually have a lot of flexibility on what I might be able to retrofit into it. Now, if I'm buying new equipment, you can pretty much do whatever you want. We can build anything you want to handle anything you need. But if you have existing equipment, then there's only so much space for certain kinds of filters, and the fan can only move a certain amount of air, so we get kind of restricted. But air handlers, out of all the equipment I'm going to show you today, is going to be the most flexible. So the normal recommendation I would have for an air handler in terms of filtration is to use a solution like this. This one happens to be from a company called Secure Air. We've been working with them since 2013, almost exclusively doing hospital work with them. Our company does all kinds of industries, industrial, offices, residential, everything. But our hospital group uses this all the time to keep things clean in a hospital. Hospitals have a lot of filtration and they run their systems 24/7. So it does cost them a lot of fan energy to push air through filters. So if they can find things that don't require as much fan energy, they start getting excited about that. They have to keep things clean and they're willing to spend money to do that. But if they can save money and still do that, then it's a bonus to them. So if you recall from Wednesday, the summary of how this Secure Air technology works, not only is it a good filter, a Merv 15 filter, but it actually has the ability to help us attack stuff in the space. Normally, a filter waits for the air to circulate through your building and make its way back to the filter. And if you recall our discussion on that, really, really small stuff doesn't care about airflow, right? So my example on Wednesday was if I got a ship and my mast is right here and the sails are down and the wind blows, yeah, a little bit of wind blows and pushes on the mast and the boat moves a little bit. But if I put the sail up, what happens? Obviously, the wind fills up that sail and pushes it along a lot faster. Well, the same thing happens with really, really tiny particles, including viruses. If I'm just a little tiny dot, it's really easy for the airflow in the room to go right around me and have no effect on me or very minimal effect on me. So how the heck do I get that little virus to come all the way back to my filter to get caught? Well, that's where this kind of technology and technologies like this kick in. So if you recall, what ends up happening is the airflow comes through the first piece, which is a conditioner. That guy is charging particles, and some of them are going to be positive and some of them are going to be negative. And those things are going to collide into each other. And they're going to get larger because of that. The positive and negative attract, and now it's a bigger thing. Instead of 5 small things, it's one larger thing. And then it is more likely to get caught in the filter right after that. And then, believe it or not, this kind of technology also has the ability to kill that item. Well, technically you can't kill a virus because a virus isn't alive, because it can't live without a host. So you inactivate the virus. But you can kill mold and you can kill bacteria and inactivate viruses. But I like to say kill because it just sounds better. So we condition these particles by charging them and causing them to collide. Now they're bigger, they get captured on the filtration media, and then they basically get electrocuted to death, and then they're goners. If they're still small enough to fit through the filter, which definitely still happens, because some things are really small when we start out. They're smaller than a virus. So some things get charged and they clump together, but they're still so small they do fit through the filter, and they make their way back into the space. But they still have a charge on them from before. So now they attract to other stuff inside your space. And now those things in the space, inside the room, in the classroom, get bigger. And now when that wind comes along, it's no longer a mast, it's now a sail, and the airflow can now push that thing all the way back into my return duct. Or it clumps stuff together that it's heavy enough that it actually falls down to the ground, where I can sweep it up, vacuum it up, wipe it up, and so forth. So not only does this kind of filtration work at the air handling piece of equipment, but it also works on doing stuff to help you in the actual occupied space. That's what one looks like over there on the left-hand side when it's installed. You typically need a decent amount of space for this guy. It is fairly wide, not as wide as a HEPA system, but it is fairly wide, 9 inches in thickness. It is a Merv 15, which is great, way better than what ASHRAE recommends for COVID purposes. And the nice thing is it only has a pressure drop of 0.28 inches. For you guys that don't work with air handling equipment, you might not understand what that necessarily means, but that's pretty similar to a normal filter. Like really low end filters, you're going to have like 0.1 or 0.15. So this is more pressure drop than a regular filter, but it's nothing like a HEPA where I'm going to have between 0.6 and 1.2 inches of pressure drop. So this is definitely manageable for most existing air handlers. So if your air handler has the space to put this in, and the fan is a VFD controlled fan and we can speed it up just a tiny bit, this is probably the way to go because it's a really good filter and it helps attack stuff in the space. Additionally, the filtration actually lasts a long time. If you had Merv 13 filters, which is the bare minimum ASHRAE is going to recommend for catching SARS-CoV-2, you're probably going to have to change those filters every 6 months or so, or at least in this example, right? Because the pressure is going to build up and build up pretty high. And at some point it's so high, we're going to have to change the filter out. Now we're going to do it. This is kind of a hospital example, but in a school, we're probably going to have to do it before 1.5 because it really can't handle that. So we'll have to do it somewhere down over here before we even get to 1 inch for your air handlers at your buildings. And then we'll have to change it again. So in the hospital, I might have had it done it 3 times. Maybe in the school, I have to do it 5 or 6 times over the course of a year and a half. So if you guys are already changing filters if you're already doing filters every 3 months, and then you put in a Merv 13, which catches more stuff, you'll have to change the filter more than every 3 months, right? Something like this technology, though, the Secure Air, it loads differently. It loads, I don't know how to say it. Here's the airflow coming this way. Instead of loading on the face of the filter, it actually loads on the backside forward, so it's a little bit less restrictive. So as you can see in the green here, the pressure builds up slowly, and we can get a year and a half out of it before we have to change the filter. Filters cost more, right? So there's more cost that way, but there's a little bit less labor cost from the frequency of having to change them. All right. If you don't have, by the way, if I didn't say it at the beginning, if you guys have questions, just type them in, man. I'd love to have questions. Interrogate me on stuff. The more you ask, the more fun it is for me. So ask me anything you want, as long as it's kind of related to this topic. A lot of you probably have packaged rooftops on the roof. You may have single zone rooftops. That's just like a little 5-ton rooftop that's serving the office area. You may have rooftops serving the gymnasium, the cafeteria. You may have VAV rooftops that are serving all the classrooms. But a lot of you probably have some rooftops at your facility. Now, rooftops are a little bit harder. I'm not going to be able to stick one of those Secure Air type units in a rooftop. First of all, the fan system isn't going to be able to handle the pressure, and I probably can't beef it up enough in the field to do that. And then I'm also going to be kind of space constrained. Most of you guys have changed those filters, and you know I'm not working with a lot of space. I pull that filter out. It's coming out of a hole like this big, and the rack is only 1 or 2 inches to begin with. There's not a lot of space to work with. So your options for upgrading filters are challenging because generally speaking, the higher the Merv rating, the better the filter I put in, the thicker, the wider it's going to get. So I'm going to have to put in something that's, instead of 1 inch, I'm going to put something then that's 3 or 4 inches in depth in order to get good filtration. And that's a problem. I don't have the space to do it on a rooftop unit. So because of that, we have solutions for that. This is one of those solutions. Like I said, there's many things going on here, but this one can come in a 1 or a 2 inch width scenario. We call it MicroClean 95. It's made by a company called Respicare. And once again, I'm not here to sell you guys stuff. Like, I'm not a sales guy. We have a whole division for that. I literally do training every single day, all day. And it just seemed like it was time to not only train engineers and contractors, but start trying to train some of the building operators on stuff too. So if you want to go out and find something else that's similar to this, it doesn't really bother me. It bothers our sales guys, but it doesn't bother me. I just want you to know how stuff works. This is a Merv 13 filter, but it's only like 1 inch, or in the case of the bigger ones, 2 inches wide, and it has a very low pressure drop, even less than that Secure Air had. So 0.15 to 0.2. That's like the pressure drop of a normal like Merv 10 type filter, or even a Merv 8 in some cases that you may already have. So it doesn't have a lot of pressure drop penalty, but it does require a power connection to it. It's only 24 volts, which means it's low voltage, which means you don't need conduit. So it's pretty easy to run power over to it. And then you can buy all different types of sizes of these to match up with what you already have. So let's say you already have a rooftop unit, and let's say it holds 4 filters that are, I don't know, 20 by 25 dimensions. Well, then you would buy 4 of these that are 20 by 25, and you would slide them in right where the old filters went, except they'd have this little power connection cord going out to the main cabinet to get 24 volts. So it's a pretty easy retrofit. Now, the reason it's such good pressure drop, low pressure drop, but high MERV rating is that it's just not the filter itself. In fact, when you open this up, the filter media looks pretty low end and cheap. It's pretty thin, it's inexpensive, and you're like, this is it? Like, what the hell? Why is this a MERV 13? Well, it's because it's not just the filter media, it's this charging grid over here as well. So similar to what the Secure Air was doing, this guy is charging particles as they come in. And then some of them are positive charged and some of them are negative charged, which means they clump together better, they get bigger, makes it easier to get stuck in the filter. And it has this grounding strip on it where it can attract stuff to it. So it's using electrostatic energy and actual media disposable filter to get the kind of the best of both worlds. You can do electronic air cleaners, electrostatic air cleaners in your building. We got these plates that go in the airstream, and you charge the plates, and then you charge the particles coming in. Let's say you charge the plates positive, and you charge the particles coming in negative. Well, then the particles stick on the plates. It works really well, and you catch a lot of small stuff that you never catch with a regular filter. The problem is every month or two, you got to go up there, take the plates out and wash them, and then put the plates back in. And nobody wants to do that. So this kind of combines the two scenarios where most of the dirt gets caught on this regular style filter that's inside there. This door closes and locks down. And then the really fine stuff gets on the electrostatic charging. So you take that out and put a new one in, take it out, put a new one in. It's faster. And then every once in a while, you do have to brush this off and clean it, but it's not as much work as cleaning electrostatic plates. Let's see, we got a question from Cameron. So long I have to expand my window to read it. Give me 1 second to do that. All right, let's see what Cameron asks. What is the cleaning process like for these filters that trap viruses and small particles? Wouldn't disturbing the trapped particles and accidentally putting them back into the airstream be of concern? That's an excellent question, Cameron. And usually that's the kind of question we get from hospitals, not from regular buildings. So that's awesome that you're even thinking like that. All right, so let's answer the question separately for this guy. If you have this Secure Air style one, this guy's actually killing the particles on the actual grid. So once they're attracted on there, they are destroyed. They are broken down and they are killed. They're inactivated. They're dead viruses. Kind of like if you go get the flu shot, they're basically putting dead virus in you. Now we can debate whether you should get a flu shot or not, blah, blah, blah. It's a separate discussion. But once it's dead, it's not going to be doing anything. So cleaning it, not a problem. On some of these other things where you're just catching a virus on a regular filter, like say you just put the Merv 14 in, like Ashray was talking about, or the Merv 13, yeah, the virus could still be alive, and it's something that we can calculate as well. And the same thing with this guy, he's electrostatically charged. Some of them will get killed because of the electricity flowing through the virus, but some of them won't. They'll be caught on the regular disposable part of the media, and they won't necessarily be killed. So then you can look at the longevity of the virus. I don't have it on this slide deck, but I had it on Wednesday. The Department of Homeland Security, and I can send you guys a link if you want, has a maybe I can pull it up real quick, since I did invite you guys for side tangents, so it is my own fault. But let me see if I can find it. Homeland Security COVID calculator. Okay, so can you guys see this web browser? Hopefully you can. Estimated surface decay rates for COVID. So in this particular one, pull it up here. Let's see. This one is the temperature humidity one, which is perfect for our scenario. I can only go so far down. But what's going on there? It usually goes lower than that. Let me find the other one. Okay, we'll use this one because it goes to lower temperatures like we'd have in the wintertime. So I'm turning the UV index off because I don't have any sunlight shining on my filter, so that's out of the discussion. So then the question becomes, what's the temperature of my air, in purpose of your question, air near the filter section and the humidity near the filter section. So let's say this is winter time, so your air is probably a little colder, right? Maybe you got, I don't know, it's that you're not keeping it in the 70s probably, or maybe you are, but by the time it gets back there, so 69, and let's say the relative humidity is lower because it's wintertime. So if I was at 69 and say 30%, it's going to have a half-life of 194 minutes. After 1,200 minutes, yeah, I should have picked something easier. That was better for my math skills. I'm going to cheat because I'm so bad at math. That's 21 hours. After 21 hours, it's basically going to all be dead. Oh, geez, there's a column right there, 21 hours. Super smart I am today. If my space is heated warmer or my humidity is higher, then it's going to take less hours for that virus to die. So is it possible that somebody goes to change a filter and a viruses from the space got on the filter and are still alive by the time that person gets there? Yeah, that's totally possible. But it's also likely that most of them have died by the time that happens. So there are things you can do. Obviously, when you're unrelated to COVID, when you're changing filters, it would be advisable to wear gloves and a mask because other stuff is on that filter also. Now, most of us don't do that. We certainly don't do it at home, and we probably don't do it when changing rooftops. The guys that work at hospitals do, though, and they actually have a bag in, bag out process where they slide the filter into a bag as they're doing it and tie it off to reduce the spread. I'd be more concerned about not necessarily pulling it in and out, but walking around through the building with it and then going to throw it away. So they bag them in and bag them out. You can wear a mask and gloves when you do it. You may also want to think about doing it on Monday morning. So if let's say you start at 6 a.m. on Monday morning, maybe that's the best time to change the filters because nobody's been there for a while. They haven't been there since Friday. Or even if there was basketball games and wrestling tournaments and whatever on the weekend, that's probably over and done and said with on Saturday, maybe late afternoon Sunday. Monday morning is probably the best time for you to avoid stuff if you want to make that kind of your filter change time for some of these spaces to make it a little bit smarter. It's a great side question that I had not thought of. All right. Any other questions? Just type them in, man. I love the questions, and hopefully that answered most of your question, Cameron. So that's air handling units and rooftop units. A lot of schools also have much smaller systems, and this may be your school district. You might be in the same boat as some of these pictures here that I have. So for starters, you might have what's called a classroom unit ventilator. These are extremely popular for schools, hence the name classroom unit ventilator. They became less popular maybe about 12 or 14 years ago. We used to do them in schools almost exclusively. Now a lot of schools have moved over to VAV systems, stuff like that. But there still are literally thousands and thousands of schools in the Midwest that still have classroom unit ventilators. If you don't know what I'm talking about, well, you guys do because you work at schools. But if you didn't, it's that cabinet by the window that as a kid you shoved crayons and pencils into. Yeah, that's the unit. It was funny as a kid, but then working in buildings later on, not so much funny. But those classroom unit ventilators, as you probably know, they don't have a lot of space. There is a filter in there. I don't have any space to put in like a secure type thing. I probably could put in that Respicare one. I could probably do that and make that happen and possibly squeeze something in there. I probably won't. There's other things I'm going to recommend to you as we go on today. But that's a pretty space constrained option, a piece of equipment. The other stuff on this screen is even more space constrained than that. So sometimes you might have ductless systems like this guy or this guy up here where there is no outside air intake. The nice thing about the classroom unit vent, it has a hot water coil in it and usually a chilled water coil. And then there's an opening louver on the wall where it sucks fresh air in. So every classroom gets fresh air, just like the air handler and rooftop did. These ductless systems, typically you're not getting any fresh air. So you're already in a big bind in some of those buildings. And then everything is so tight and tiny. The filter is like, it's like a piece of cheesecloth. It's so thin. And I know I'm ripping on those systems. We use a lot of those systems for a lot of applications. We sell numerous brands at our office. But I'm just saying from a filtration standpoint, no bueno, man, they're not good. So you can't really upgrade the filtration really at all on those two guys. And then some of you may have heating only schools, right? Where you got radiators or baseboard in each classroom to heat the school. And then you've put in small air conditioners or maybe you put in window air conditioners to kind of temper things off in September and in May. But you really don't have an air handling system at all. You have none of these things. In the wintertime, you don't have any airflow, zero fresh air unless someone opens a window. So there's nowhere to put a filter because you don't even have airflow. And if you have this window unit, I guess you could run it year round and try to put a better filter in there. But once again, you have space like this to work with. So for the ductless systems and the window unit, you're not going to be able to do anything to beef up the filtration. The unit vent, you might be able to. So we're going to have to help those kind of spaces in different ways. One of the ways, I'll show you a couple different ways today, but one of the ways we can help those spaces is with standalone filtration. So I know this picture is showing a hospital because originally this product was developed for hospitals. And by the way, today it received the Time Magazine award. They list like the top 100 technologies of the year kind of thing, and this made the list under the air quality section. So this one is actually a filtration system in a box. It's a HEPA filter, so it's really top end filtration with a fan in a box on wheels that plugs in. So it's very easy to adapt this. Back in April, we were taking these and sticking them in some of these, I don't know what you want to call it, ad hoc hospital wards that were being adapted, taking one space and converting it to something else really quickly because we're expecting all these COVID patients. So we were sticking tons of these in these kind of spaces, and they can be used in multiple ways. We were originally using them as a negative air machine for hospitals, but they can also be used as a standalone scrubber. We just don't duct them in those cases. So the one that we've been using is called OptiClean. It's from Carrier, and we're a Carrier distributor, so it shouldn't surprise you that we use that one. It's HEPA filtration, so we can get down to those really small particles, 99.97% of the 0.3 micron particles. It can catch smaller particles as well. It's just that filters aren't tested below 0.3, so it's difficult to get you data on that, obviously. It has a pre-filter on it. So I think it's a Merv 7 pre-filter. Merv 7 sucks. It's horrible, obviously, as I already mentioned. But the purpose of the pre-filter is to catch all the big stuff. So the big stuff doesn't get to the HEPA, and then therefore the HEPA can be used for the small stuff. And the idea with the pre-filter is it catches all the big stuff. I change it out frequently and put new ones in because the Merv 7 filters are super cheap. The HEPA is expensive, and this HEPA, I can have it last 2, 3, 4 years before I have to change it, even though I'm changing that Merv 7 every 3 months. It's basically a sacrificial lamb to keep the Merv filter viable for a long time. They come in 3 different models. Originally it was just 2, 600 CFM and 1500 CFM, and now they made a smaller 500, kind of more of a cost-effective one. Originally developed for hospitals, but now, I'm not even exaggerating, there's something like 10,000 of these that have been either installed in schools or ordered for schools right now. In the United States. It's a huge amount in the school market because everybody's in the same boat as you. They're all like, yeah, we're trying to do a better job, but we have radiators. I don't even have any airflow. What the hell am I supposed to do? So we're taking these kind of things and we're putting them into space. They're small footprint. They're on wheels. They're easy to install, obviously, because they're on wheels. The only real knock on them is that they are going to have some sound associated with them. Now, it's not crazy sound. It's not even as loud as your air conditioner at home. But you're putting a fan in the room, so you're going to have fan noise. So there's the sound data. If you're using it as an air scrubber, you're around 60 dB. So you're just a little bit quieter than like an air conditioning fan. But it's a fan in a room, so people are going to notice that. But right now, if your choices are the room having background noise or the room having more viruses floating around, what are you going to do? So pre-filters on there. There's dirty filter indicator lights. So the occupants, i.e. the teacher in your case, knows the filter is dirty, and they can put in a maintenance request for you guys to change the filter. As opposed to you changing them randomly on a schedule, not randomly, on a schedule, hopefully, you're changing them when they're actually dirty. You can still do them on a schedule if you want. If you want to just change them every X amount of months, you could do that. Or you can wait for the indicator light. All right, questions on filtration before we move on. Let me see the time. We're doing okay. All right, let's talk about purifying the air. And this is something else we have discussed this week in the other topics if you were with us. I'm going to kind of summarize one of those technologies right now. We talked about 3 or 4 on Wednesday, but I'm going to summarize one of them right now that I feel is really good for schools because it can adapt to almost all of those kind of air handling pieces of equipment that you have. Air handlers, rooftops, unit vents, window units, ductless systems, barred units, whatever you got, it probably will be able to adapt to that, and I'll show you why. So the technology is called bipolar ionization. It's not a specific brand or product necessarily. It's a generic process, although there are manufacturers that brand it, as I'm showing you a couple here on the screen. So what this guy does, the bipolar, 2 poles, 1, 2. So he has 2 electrical poles. One of them is charging things positive, and one of them is charging things negative. So I have these 2 needles in here. Now, when I install it, I have to make sure the airflow goes this way, because I want half the stuff to be positive, half the stuff to be negative. I don't want to install it this way and charge something positive and then charge it negative, and then I have all negatives floating around. I need to have half be one way, half be the other way. So it has to be installed in a certain direction. Other than that, it's not really that tricky. So these guys are going to have positive and negative charges applied to stuff to create ions. Ions are not some kind of random thing that's just invented. They occur naturally outside all the time. They're pretty prevalent. A lot of times you'll find them by things that are water related, like a waterfall, moving water, but just going around outside, you'll find them as well. We're going to generate them in higher quantities so they can give us some of the benefits, so we can have the clean air inside like many places have outside. They do have a short lifespan. They're not really alive, but they do have a short existence. It's about a minute. So from the time I generate them with my electrical device, in this case, bipolar ionizer, to the time that they've neutralized themselves, it's about a minute. So normally I want to get them in the air handling system and make sure my air handling system can deliver them to the space in a timely manner. And that's usually not a problem for the most of the systems we're talking about. Certainly not a problem for like unit vents and stuff like that, because air leaves the air handler and like 1 foot later it's in the room. For a large ducted system, we got to be a little bit smarter about it, but there's definitely ways we can do it. So what's actually going on with these guys? They are creating positive and negative ions, sending those ions out into the space, and because they have the charges on them, they are attaching themselves to each other and to other things that are in the space, which makes them get bigger. Kind of like we talked about before. Small stuff doesn't care about gravity. Small stuff doesn't care about airflow. I mean, really small stuff doesn't care, like viruses. So if I can get them to clump together, they are now bigger, which means they're going to fall on the floor. And I can clean the floor and mop them up. I can vacuum them up. I can wipe them off counters and doorknobs. I can get them entrained into the airflow and suck them back to a nice filter. So it's going to do that kind of stuff. The other thing that it's going to do is it's going to strip the hydrogen atoms away from some of these viruses and bacteria, and kind of, it almost like surrounds the virus and suffocates it. I realize the virus isn't breathing like you and I breathe, but just like we need oxygen, viruses and bacteria need hydrogen to survive, and we are stripping them of all that hydrogen, so they're kind of sort of suffocating to death. And it can rip apart the cells of these walls by removing that hydrogen atom, and then they're dead, or they're inactivated, I should say, right? So the technology is going to create a 12 electron volt plasma field. So anything less than 12 volts, it can work on. So it's not only going to work on destroying bacteria and viruses in the space, but it'll also break down chemicals as long as the chemical electron volt is below 12, which are all these ones in black here, plus several others. Stuff above 12, like oxygen, it's not going to do anything with, which is good because we need oxygen, or methane, which we wish it would break it down, but it's just too high of electron volt, we can't do it. But other stuff, so if you clean, if you're cleaning stuff in the space with chemicals and it's ammonia or alcohol based, and that those chemicals are floating around in the school after you cleaned, this will help break those things down and make them something neutral. So for example, if I have ammonia, here's my ammonia, it's coming through the plasma field that I created. If you didn't know, ammonia is 3-part hydrogen, 1 part nitrogen. I'm not a chemistry professor or anything. Hopefully none of you are on here either, because then you'll probably give me a hard time. But it goes to the plasma field, breaks them apart. Now I have 3 independent hydrogens and 1 independent nitrogen. And now those things could regroup together as ammonia again. That's possible, but it's very unlikely because ammonia is not a super stable compound. Instead, it's more likely that a couple of those hydrogens jump on an oxygen and become H2O. I'm good with H2O. And a couple of nitrogens could buddy up and become N2, which is the kind of nitrogen that we have in our air. 80% of the air we breathe is nitrogen. So I'm good with that also. And most of the things we break down are going to break down and reform into something benign as opposed to something hazardous. I mentioned that we'll be able to have these ion clusters clump around the particle and make them bigger and heavier, which makes my filter work better. My Merv 10 filter might work like a Merv 13. My Merv 13 might work like a Merv 16. It actually makes the filtration ability of your regular filter better. And then, as mentioned, these ions create the hydroxyls. Actually, I didn't mention that, I should have. They create the hydroxyls, which is a cleaning detergent. If you get like laundry detergent for your clothing, and you might get like Tide with Oxy, right? Same kind of idea here. It's an oxidizer. So these ones are hydroxyls, and those are what's going to rob the hydrogen from the particles that are living, viruses, bacteria, mold, and strip them of their hydrogen so they die. I showed you guys this chart the other day too, if you had joined us. This is that Merv rating scale again, and how much of SARS we can catch. Now, right now, this particular study from ASHRAE was what I'm going to call the regular SARS, like the SARS we had from a couple years ago, pre-COVID. The new COVID one is SARS-CoV-2. This is just regular SARS. But at the time this study was done, 10 years ago, whatever it was, that's all that there was, right? So here was the Merv ratings of filters, and this is how much of that SARS virus they could catch on their own. right? So a Merv 6, 8, 10 filter is doing pretty much nothing. When you got up to Merv 13, you're doing some work. And it doesn't show Merv 14 on here, but let's just assume it's somewhere in the middle, 50, 60%. And that's kind of how ASHRAE is coming up with recommendations of getting Merv 13 and Merv 50 or 14 in there, because that's going to maybe catch like half of these things that are around that size. Now you can combine that filter with a UVC light, which we talked about on week 1 as well, and get that guy to perform a little bit better, because now we'll be killing it. I'm not a big fan of putting UVC lights on filters, because once I've caught the thing, like, okay, like, so I'm gonna kill it. UVC lights, as you know from Wednesday, only do a good job of killing things that are stationary. So if you shine them on a filter, yes. Shine them on a cooling coil, fantastic application, because the coil doesn't move. But trying to use UVC to clean stuff in the air, not so much. It has to wait for the bad thing to kind of land by it. The filter combined with an ionizer, like the bipolar ionizer we've been talking about, gets an even bigger jump. So that Merv 10, kind of like good but not phenomenal filter that you might have at your building right now, it's catching 12% of SARS, 35% with UVC light, 89% when I combine it with an ionizer. So a filter with an ionizer is a pretty good combo. And if you get up to the Merv 13, which is ASHRAE's recommendation, instead of 46, you're getting 98.8. 98.8, that is nearly HEPA by itself, but the pressure drop of a Merv 13. So if you can put in a Merv 13, 14, 15 and combine it with an ionizer, you're getting what I'm going to call near HEPA performance. And of course, you could take a HEPA and combine it with an ionizer and do even better. You could be stud, right? If there's studs for virus catching. And this is an ASHRAE study. More recently, there's been some other studies as well by other entities. Here's 2 of them showing a Merv 18 combined with needlepoint bipolar ionization can perform like a Merv 13. A Merv 12 can perform like a Merv 16. So there's several different studies out there kind of showing that. More importantly and more interesting, one of the bipolar ionizers is from a company called GPS, Global Plasma Solutions. We used to work with these guys for years, and then it kind of fizzled off and we stopped and we used other technologies for a while. But when they came out with this information back in June, they were the only manufacturer at that time to have been tested for SARS-CoV-2 and inactivating it. So because of that, we reopened our relationship with them. We never really, killed it. We just didn't do much with them anymore. But we ramped everything back up, and as of September, we've been using a ton of these things now, a lot of these things, like millions of dollars of these things, and they're only a few $100s each. So it's been crazy. At the time that this study came out in June, they had tested for and published a 99.4% inactivation rate of SARS-CoV-2 in a 30-minute window. They test other stuff too that they've been doing for years and years and years, and they actually have really good kill/inactivation rates on SARS-CoV-2 compared to other stuff. SARS is pretty easy to kill. It's not what I'm going to call a strong virus. It's just one that spreads fast, which is why we're in the situation we're in this country right now, or this world for that matter. But once we have a way to kill it, it's pretty easy to actually kill it. So at the time I made these slides earlier in the week, this was the only product that had been tested that I'm aware of to kill SARS-CoV-2. We've got a lot of other products that we use that have been tested on regular SARS, human coronavirus, but different versions. But this is the first one that was tested on that. As of Wednesday, literally while I was giving my other presentation, some of our other products, specifically Respicare Oxy 4, published their study data. So if you're interested in that, let me know. So the cool thing about GPS and why we've chosen it to pair up with schools is that they have lots of different sizes and versions of this technology to fit in whatever crevice you have. Most of the other things that we do are larger filter racks or larger duct-mounted assemblies. This one has things that are small and skinny if we need it to be that way. So it does adhere to schools very well. They make lots of versions of this thing, and hence you can stick it in lots of different places on your system. You can stick it in the air handler. You can stick it in a duct. You can stick it in a ductless high wall unit. Lots of places and lots of versions you can shove it. So if I look at those same pieces of equipment we had before, here's a central station air handler like we talked about with the filtration. I got a lot of space. What are my primary options for this? Well, I'm still going to say use that secure air. It's a filter, a really good filter, and it has the ability to tack stuff into space. If you're using secure air, you don't need a bipolar ionizer. You don't need GPS. You're already getting it done with one thing. But if you already have good filtration in your air handler, or you can't fit better filtration in there and you want to do something else, you may want to consider one of these GPS items. This is the one you're probably going to use on a larger air handler. It's called iMod, mod meaning modular. This replaces their old system, which had to be kind of I don't know how I say it, like custom built for the size of your air handler. Well, now what they do is they give you a power box and a header, and then they give you 6-inch blocks that you snap into each other and to get the links that you need. And they or we will help you determine the size that you need for the surface area that you got. But this is a picture of an actual installation. So they have 1, 2, 3 rows of these things on a very large air handler. It's going to be expensive compared to one of these small ones. It won't be hundreds of dollars like it was on a small piece of equipment like you'll have for a unit vent. But you have one big air handler serving half of the school, so it kind of still averages out pretty good. The thing on these guys is they do need a little bit of maintenance. All those needles, so each one of these needles is a bipolar ionizer like we had been talking about. So positive, a negative, a positive, a negative, a positive, a negative, and so on. But you have to go up to them, like, let's just say every 6 to 12 months, just depends on how dirty they get, and take a little alcohol wipe and put it on your finger and just run it down that guy, run it down that guy. You just run it down each one of those needles just to kind of wipe it off. So when you're changing the filters, essentially that same point in time, wipe all the needles off. These aren't metal needles like they used to use in the old days to create these charges. These are like a carbon brush, if you will. But they do need to be wiped off because of the electrical charge on them. They themselves do attract some dust to cling onto them. And the more stuff that clings on them, the less they can produce and put into the plasma field. So they got to be wiped down every once in a while. That's literally the only maintenance on them. There's no bulbs to change. There's no bulbs at all. There's nothing to address. You just wipe them off at the same time you change the filters. If you have packaged rooftop units, you're probably going to have slightly smaller equipment than I'm going to have with the air handler with these guys. And I'm pretty space constrained. There is a series of options that we have for that. This is just one of those. This one happens to be the one that's for 48,000 CFM. So 48,000 CFM is like 12-ton rooftop unit. There's another one that goes up to 2,400 CFM, which is like a 6-ton. So there's a 6-ton model. And then there's this one, which is up to 12-ton rooftop units. And then when you get bigger than that, we can either put 2 of these in, or we can go to the iMod we were talking about. So this guy can either be screwed in, or it comes with these large rare earth magnets you can use to attach it to stuff. In this case, it's attached to the side of the blower. The idea being where on this guy, the grid, I had to kind of try to cover the whole width of airflow, if you will. On here, all the airflow is eventually going to get sucked into the eye of the impeller over here. So I'm going to put it right at the eye of the impeller, and then pretty much all the airflow has to go past him. Once again, some of the air needs to go past this needle and some across the back needle, so it does have to mount in that direction. And then the cool thing about this guy is he has what I'm going to call a helicopter on him. So every day, this helicopter thing just takes a little rotation, which brushes off those needles for me. So I have zero maintenance. There's nothing to do whatsoever. It's self-cleaning. You literally wire it up, usually with 24 volts, or you can do high voltage if you want to. And you put a couple magnets on the bottom, stick it to the blower housing, and away it goes. The only thing you might want to do is, like, every couple of years, just check to make sure that no debris is building up on there, because if it is, that means something happened to this little motor. But that motor only rotates like once a day, and it's pretty low torque, so it's probably never going to go bad, but some stuff goes bad. There's a duct-mounted version. So if you, let's say you have a very large air handling system that covers like the whole school, right? Some 100,000 CFM air handler, and you don't want to put the iMod in, because I told you those irons only last like a minute. So by the time they get all the way down the duct, they only got a few seconds left to attack stuff into space. That's not awesome. So I may choose, instead of putting those iMods in, maybe if my air handler goes off to, like, let's say 3 different wings of the building, further down the duct system, I may want to put a duct mounted version of this on each of those 3 wings and do it that way. A lot of times we use these for tenant buildings, which doesn't apply to you in the school world, but a tenant may want to put one in their space, and they're on a shared air handler with a bunch of other tenants, so they just put one in the duct section that goes to their space. There are things to do with that. And it's got the helicopter thing on it to be self-cleaning as well. Now, if you got the small equipment like we were talking about, there's not a lot you can do with filtration. Pretty much no option, no option, no option, some slight possible options on the unit vent. But one of the things that we can do is use these ionizers again. There are small versions of it. Normally, this small version is used in small residential applications with low airflow. But as far as airflow is concerned, my unit vent is pretty much a residential unit. It's not a residential unit. Obviously, you wouldn't find one in a house, but from an airflow standpoint, it's in that range. 8 tons or less, that's definitely in the range. And this thing is small, dude. It's like, I don't know how I should have brought the dimensions up. I'm not smart enough to do that. But it's like this wide by that. So it's like this long by that wide by that tall. It's a little brick. And I could pretty much fit it anywhere. So this is definitely an option to put into those kind of units. It's very compact. It's inexpensive. It's like hundreds of dollars instead of thousands. It's a really good option. It's still probably not going to fit in a ductless mini split or in a window unit at an older school. So for a ductless mini split, this is what I'm going to do. We have another solution called an I-rib. It comes in 36 or 18-inch lengths, and it's the same kind of thing. There's the ionizer. Let's just say a positive one, a negative one, a positive one, a negative one, etc. And you just unroll it, and it's only going to be like 1/4 of an inch thick, and you just lay it across the top of the airflow stream, and then you got a little power cube that you got to put over on the side. And the power cube is also compact and thin because they know you don't have any place to put it. It's specifically for those kinds of ductless systems, right? So it's for this guy, or it's for that guy, or it's for this high wall style here that we're showing the picture of. You might be able to fit that into a window unit. You might, but my guess is it might still even be tough because the length might be too long. Maybe the 18-inch one might fit depending on the width of your evaporator and some of those small window units. But if you have just window units, like portable air conditioners that stick out the window, or you have a heating only building that doesn't even have window units, right? You're really limited on airflow and filtration, like we said. So I recommended that you put in the Carrier OptiClean air scrubber, the HEPA box on wheels. Well, you could take that same air scrubber with the fan in it and the filter, and you could add one of these guys to it. And then you can get the best of both worlds. Now I have something that's going to create the ions, that's going to attack bacteria and viruses in the space. It's also going to make things clump together so they're bigger, so they can get sucked into the airflow back to this new airflow box that I just added into the space. Now, I still don't have any fresh air coming from outside, which is kind of not awesome. But at least I'm doing a good job filtering and a good job killing stuff in this space, including COVID. And I can go back to my constituents in my town and say, this is what we're doing. This is what we're putting in. This is the best that we can do with the kind of buildings we have. And we have a product that's been tested and proven to actually kill COVID in the air. That's one of the things I've noticed. Like I'm in some of the chat groups for my community, for my own school district my kids are on. And every once in a while, people will post something like, man, I just want this to be over. I wish they would just like invent something that just kills COVID right out of the air. And I'm like, that's already been invented. We've had stuff that kills viruses out of the air for years. You guys just don't know about it, which is one of the driving forces on me wanting to do a webinar like this. All right, I got a few more slides for you. I know I'm running kind of low on time. For those of you that have building automation systems, so the people with the window units and the ductless, that's probably not you, but with the large air handling systems, it might be you, right? So you have a computer-based building automation system. There are lots of things that we can track in the space that will help us with the system. You definitely you're already tracking temperature, right? But you should definitely add humidity discussion. As I showed you kind of on that Homeland Security slider, humidity plays a much bigger role than you think. So I want to add humidity sensors to my system. You can get wall sensors for almost every automation system that has temperature and humidity combined. So it might be a matter of just A, switching out the wall sensor, and B, having your controls guy or yourself, if you're savvy with it, add another point on the screen for you to be able to read and monitor that humidity, and then have it send you alarms if you get below 40 or above 60%, right? You may want to measure carbon dioxide. I'll explain that in a little bit on why you might want to do that, but carbon dioxide is an indicator of people breathing in the space. And it's an indicator of if you're doing a good job with outdoor ventilation air. Yeah, I'm spitting CO2 out my mouth all day long, so CO2 is building in the room, but if I have a good amount of fresh air coming in, that'll drive the CO2 low. So if you have high CO2, it's not a hazardous thing where someone's going to not be able to breathe, but it's an indication you're not bringing enough fresh air into the loop down pollutants. We can put sensors across the filter to tell you when the filters are actually dirty. We say I'm not going to go out and mount it. I used to do building automation for like 10 years, but now I stick to the classroom. But you can put sensors across the filter to tell you when the filter is dirty, so you can change them based on pressure drop versus on a regular time schedule. And then you can also get VOC sensors to measure if there's volatile organic compounds in the space. The one thing you can't get is a virus detector or a COVID detector. That doesn't exist. But these other things you can do a pretty good job with. And if these things are all in line, temperature, humidity, CO2, VOCs, filtration, the chance of me having high concentrations of COVID just lingering in the room is pretty low. And then all the manufacturers are now, of control systems, are now building all kinds of little dashboards and stuff like that. I apologize for the graininess of this view. When I blew the picture up, I didn't realize it was going to be so crappy. But they have dashboards like this or like that to kind of try to illustrate to you what's going on in your space. And this one's actually cool because they're actually taking all those things I just mentioned, all those sensors, and they're equating them into like a scorecard thing, like a single number scorecard. So you can look and see which of your rooms is performing the worst, and then focus your effort on the worst. Sean asks, missed humidity slide, was there a study done on it? Yes. We talked about that in actually really good detail on the intro webinar on Wednesday, so I'd encourage you to go back and watch that. I could also get you information on that, but there is a lot of data related to, there has been a lot of data for decades on humidity's effect on virus survival rates. In addition, I also showed you guys today that Homeland Security sliding scale thing. And then there's also data related to COVID and other coronaviruses and their ability. So if you can keep things like perfectly between 45 and 55% would be ideal. That's hard to do, but you can keep them between 40 and 60, that's pretty good. If things get too dry or too moist, the virus will have a significantly longer shelf life floating around in the air than if I can get things to be that middle humidity. 50% is the goal. By the way, all HVAC systems for human occupants are always designed for an indoor relative humidity of 50%. That's the design, but they're not often operated that way, unfortunately. There's lots of reasons for that, and we can go through that if anybody's interested. The other thing with the CO2 sensors is I can use it to control my ventilation system. It's called demand control ventilation. So if I put CO2 sensors in the space, and I started doing this in about 2000, putting CO2 sensors in buildings, and what you can do in that case is use it to count the people in the space, and I'll explain why that's interesting in a second. First of all, I'm talking about CO2, carbon dioxide, not CO, carbon monoxide. Sounds similar, unrelated. Carbon monoxide is an odorless, deadly gas. CO2 is what's coming out of your mouth as you exhale. You suck oxygen in, you breathe CO2 out. So the more people that are in a room, the more the CO2 will build up. So I can essentially use CO2 as a surrogate to digitally count the people in there and decide if I need more or less ventilation. Normal levels should be between 800 and 1200 parts per million. Now, if you have an economizer on your unit and you're in economizer mode, the CO2 level is going to go down because you're using all that outside air for free cooling. But when things are in normal operation, you definitely shouldn't be above 1200. Usually the target is 700 parts per million above the outdoor ambient level. And most of the ambient levels that I measure around here, I'm in the far west suburbs, and it's usually 400 to 450. And then when I'm towards the city of Chicago, it's more like 450 to 500. But if I just say 450, add 700, 1150, that's my indoor goal. People breathe at very predictable rates. It's very known quantities. And the activity level that you're doing, right, sitting at a desk, running on a treadmill, determines how much oxygen you need and how much CO2 you exhale. So if I'm talking about classroom stuff, I'm down over here by the gray box somewhere. Classroom and office is pretty similar. If I'm talking about the weight room at the high school, okay, I'm over here towards the heavier exercising area. But your higher activity level, the more CO2 you're going to exhale. And additionally, the CO2 concentration in the space, as I add more people, is going to go up. So if I double the amount of people, I'll double the amount of CO2. This is what that's going to look like for your building or your school. This is actually an old chart from the 90s that we made, and I still keep using it because I'm too lazy to make a prettier one. But on this bottom scale here, the vertical scale, is time of day from midnight to midnight. So each one of those is an hour band. And then up the left-hand side is my ventilation rate, with over here being no ventilation, and up top where it's 100 being my design ventilation. Whatever the building designer, architect, engineer calculated that I needed for fresh air in the building, that's this level right here. So on a normal system, what happens is the building goes occupied at 7 o'clock in the morning or whenever it goes occupied. And then the fresh air intake opens up, and I bring in a certain amount of outside air, cubic feet per minute, and it stays there all day long. And then the building goes closed, and I shut it back down. When I put the CO2 sensors in, this is the purple line. So people don't all show up for the building at the same time. They trickle in slowly, so we can notice that. They don't all even make it in. Some of them are sick that day, or they're on vacation, or they're off-site or whatever. So they're not all there. It's very rare for a building to be 100% occupied. And then in many buildings, like an office, there's a dip for lunch, and then it comes back. Now at the school, you're not going to see a dip for lunch for the whole school, but you're not going to be putting these sensors in for the whole school. You're going to be putting them in for each room. So in every room, I'm going to see at least one dip, if not multiple dips, depending on where the kids are moving around the building. So this is an office building with a 2-hump profile. A classroom might have 4 or 5 humps because kids leave to go to recess. They come back. They leave to go to PE or whatever it is. So it'll be a little bit different. But everything between purple, actual CO2 data, and green, code required ventilation is my savings. The code allows me to go below the code required outdoor ventilation rates that I showed you early on if I put a CO2 sensor in and do it dynamically on the fly. So as people leave, throttle it back to save energy. As people come back in, open it back up to get the maximum amount of ventilation that I need for all of those people. If the classroom has 5 people in it or 35 people in it, it's a different amount of fresh air that I'm going to need. Schools are actually one of the best target cases for this technology. Retail and restaurants are even slightly better because retail, every building is designed for like a Black Friday type scenario. So there's a lot of unoccupied hours or not a lot of not fully occupied hours. Same thing with restaurants, unrelated to COVID. Restaurants would have had peaks on Saturday nights and then slower other times. Schools, though, have a large savings. If you look at this, we're basically saying your school is only 30% occupied at any given time. And you're probably like, that's not right. That can't be right. Well, this is what happens at your school. Well, part of it's because summertime hardly anybody's there, right? But the other part of it is your classroom may be designed for 35 kids. You may only have 27 in there, right? That's 8 kids all year long that I don't have to ventilate for. But most importantly, that moving around thing. When the kids leave the classroom and they go to the cafeteria, there's nobody in the classroom. So I don't have to ventilate it as much. I can throttle it back. So yeah, I don't have 30% of my students in the building at a time, but each individual room on average may only be 30% of its design occupancy. So there's a lot of savings to be had at a school by doing demand ventilation systems. And I went 7 minutes over. I apologize. I've only like once this month been able to end on time with a topic. What other questions you guys have? I am totally game for other questions. If anybody has anything they want to ask or debate or think about or reference or whatever. If you guys are trying to find some of the other webinars that we've done, if you're interested, if you go to our website, which is tecmungo.com, and you click on training, you'll see me when I was smaller. But down on the bottom here, there's 3 things. There's classroom training, literally training in our hands-on labs, which has been a little bit limited lately. We're still doing it, but it's small groups and stuff like that. On the far right is YouTube. We have a whole YouTube channel, which has, I think, 200 like free videos on all sorts of topics. And then for today's purposes, this one that says online in the middle is webinars like we're doing right now, plus recorded webinars. They are all totally free. You'll find ones on here back 10, 12, 13 years ago if you're interested. There are literally thousands of hours of free recorded webinars that we have done for the HVAC community, contractors and engineers, that are also available to you guys if you want to watch them. We just have never known who you guys were up until you ended up on this webinar today. And you can search for stuff, but specifically they're in reverse order. So this is the stuff that's been going on. So if you wanted to find that part 1 that we did on Wednesday, it's right here. I encourage you to go back and watch it. It doesn't cost anything, totally free. And then you can watch other parts as well. If you want to find stuff on boiler systems and hydronics, you can type in keywords like boiler, webinar recorded, and search, and it'll bring up anything that was related to boilers that has been going on, or tips for replacing your boiler, service videos, all kinds of stuff like that. Air conditioners, chillers, whatever you have, there's probably something on there for you. If you can't find what you want, let me know, because there may be other stuff. This is just stuff that's on our site. There may be other tools and stuff that I have available that I would happily get over to you guys. So if you need something, question about IAQ or anything related to training or anything at all related to HVAC, feel free to send me a note and I will do my best to get you what you need. I teach classes every day, so you'll probably get back emails at night, but I'll hit you back. I don't see any other questions being typed in, so thanks to the few people that did interrogate me. And then if you're interested, this afternoon at 1:30, we're talking about small scale stuff that you can do at your own home if you're interested in purifying and filtering and cleaning air at your house. Believe it or not, there's a lot more options for houses than there is for commercial buildings, which is kind of sad. But historically, people would prefer to invest in their own home and their own family than they would in their employees. That's hopefully changed now. That might be one of the good byproducts of COVID is people care about their building now and their occupants and their coworkers. But there's a lot of options for houses. So join us at 1:30 if you're interested. Thank you guys for your time. I appreciate it.